Bernie Sanders is probably the person I find most loathsome in all of this. Because, as I said, one thing you cannot criticize the Israelis for is that you cannot say they hid their intentions about what they were going to do in Gaza. They were very clear about what they intended to do, which was destroy Gaza. And when it mattered, and when it was hard, believe me, to stand up and oppose what the Israelis were doing in Gaza, to oppose the United States support for it in October and November, when it actually mattered, Bernie Sanders was running around defending Israel, opposing a ceasefire, insisting that the Israelis were acting properly, and defending Biden for arming and financing Israel. And Bernie Sanders has begun to change his rhetoric solely because there are polls showing that the Biden administration is endangered by anger over the left. In fact, anger over the left, including against Bernie Sanders. Here from the New York Times, you see an article November 30th, on Israel's war against Hamas, Sanders faces a backlash from the left. The progressive disappointment with the Vermont senator, a liberal icon, reflects a broader divide among Democrats over the war. And it talks about how Biden's reelection can be imperiled if this continues for so long. And the anger of Bernie Sanders was because when it mattered, when it was hard to stand up and oppose what Israel was doing, the emotions around October 7th were very high. And anyone who did it suffered a significant cost. I can assure you, Bernie Sanders was cheering Israel on. And only in the last 2 months, when he knows it doesn't matter, when the Democratic Party needs him to show angry liberals and angry leftists and angry young people that there's still a home for them in the Democratic Party, because Bernie Sanders is also angry with Israel, only then did he become willing to criticize what Israel was doing. And even then, he's doing it in the most mealy-mouthed way possible. Here is a remarkable interview, and I want to credit the journalist. It's Ashkara from Novara Media, who did a great job in trying to press Bernie Sanders, who's in the UK, on exactly what his position is. And you tell me whether you think, again, he's definitely willing to criticize Israel, now that it doesn't matter anymore, that he needs to do so politically, but just listen to how he refuses to give his real opinion on any of the questions she's asking.
In addition to stopping the billions of dollars in military aid that Israel gets from the United States every year, would you back calls for a cultural, sporting, and economic boycott of Israel?
I am nervous about economic boycotts of any country, to be honest with you.
Now, that is an absolute lie. The United States has an economic boycott of all kinds of countries, of Cuba, of Venezuela, of Syria. And Bernie Sanders supports all of those. He's not opposed to economic boycotts of countries. Let's go on.
But right now, what people want to do, they can do what they want to do. But right now, again, my job as a United States Senator, and I'm kind of leading that effort in the Senate, is to tell Netanyahu that he is not going to get any more U.S. aid.
Did you feel nervous about the boycott movement against apartheid South Africa? Was that a concern you had at the time?
What I thought that as a...
So that's a good question as well. One of the things that took down the apartheid regime of South Africa in the 1980s was exactly the kind of economic boycott Bernie Sanders just said he's unwilling to support. So she asked him, well, what about your views of South Africa and the boycott against apartheid South Africa that was called for by the black people of South Africa trying to end apartheid? Were you also against that on this principle of yours that you don't support boycotts? And here's what he said.
What I thought that as an apartheid state at that point, it was important to put pressure. But people can do as they want. And that's all.
Do you think that it's right that British citizens and American citizens can go and fight in the IDF when, as you say, there are such profound humanitarian concerns in Gaza?
Well, I think if British and American people want to do that, I suppose they have the right to do it. It's not something that
Now, that is not a universal right. You don't have the right to go and fight in the Russian army, or to go fight in the Syrian army, or to go fight in the Iranian army. That will be treason. You will get charged with treason if you do that. But Bernie Sanders saying, but for Israel, yeah, if you want to go fight for Israel, as a lot of Americans do, people make a big point of the fact that among the hostages taken by Hamas on October 7th were Americans. That's because a lot of Americans go and fight in the Israeli army. And there may have been some hostages who were just visiting. There were hostages representing, I think, 9 or 10 nations, including Thailand and Brazil and other countries. But big reason why there's so many Americans in Israel is because Americans go and fight for the Israeli Defense Force, something you're allowed to do, even though you're not allowed to do that for every other country.
Really thought a whole lot about.
Do you think they should have the right?
Look, I think what the Israeli government doing now is horrible, and I'm not quite sure why people would want to be, part of that effort.
She then tried to ask him several times as well, would you say that Israel is guilty of genocide? And he, as he's done many times before, has refused to give an answer. Now, as I said earlier, that for the first 2 months, Bernie Sanders was singing a much different tune. Here he was on Face the Nation in December of 2023, about exactly 2 months after the October 7th attack, and he was asked about whether he supports a ceasefire in Gaza. By this point, something like 10,000 Palestinians had been killed, many thousands of children. And here's what the socialist senator, the independent senator from Vermont said.
In terms of a permanent ceasefire, I don't know how you could have a permanent ceasefire with Hamas, who has said before October 7th and after October 7th that they want to destroy Israel. They want a permanent war. I don't know how you have a permanent ceasefire with an attitude like that.
Now, Bernie Sanders got a lot of support for saying that, including from the biggest pro-Israel activist group, AIPAC, which promptly went to Twitter and said, thank you, Senator Sanders, for your strong opposition to a permanent ceasefire with Hamas. There are people who from the start opposed the Israeli war in Gaza and U.S. support for that war, and who still do. And then there are people who supported the Israeli war in Gaza. I know a lot of people in my life who did that and still do. And on some level, I can at least respect the intellectual consistency of that. People in my life said, look, what happened on October 7th is an absolute atrocity. No country can allow that to happen. And whatever Israel needs to do to go prevent that from happening again, I support that. And those people have continued to this very day to maintain that principle. What Bernie Sanders and so many other Western liberals did was stand up when it was so politically cheap to do so, when it took courage not to do it, and stood up and applauded the Israelis and said, we support the right of the Israelis to go in Gaza and do what they want to do. Knowing that the Israelis would do exactly this because Israel said it would. And now what's happening is two things. One is there's the political need for Bernie Sanders to now suddenly change his tune so he can try and attract the young voters and the left-wing voters who once idolized him so he can lead them to go vote for Joe Biden. But I think the bigger motivation is actually the more ignoble one, which is that Bernie Sanders doesn't want the pile of corpses in Gaza on his conscience or on his legacy, even though he absolutely is responsible for them because he cheered this for a long time when his opposition actually could have made a difference. And a lot of these Western liberals who cheered Israel when there was so much pressure on them to do so, now are suddenly saying, oh my, this is too far. I can't support this. This is what they supported. This is what they encouraged. This is what they enabled. And now suddenly they don't want it to be on their legacy and their conscience that they supported it, even though they did, so they want to pretend that now they're against it. And you cannot let them rewrite that history. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.